Hello, everybody. And
Oops, sorry, music's over. I guess.
well, when you're at lunchtime, you just kind of let loose a little bit, right?
Yeah,
So,
you gotta dance in your seat, right? When it's
yeah,
music, yeah.
exactly.
Especially for a catchy tune like that.
Oh yeah.
We've gotten some kudos on that, actually. Just recently, we got some kudos on that. So, welcome everybody. Welcome to the dance party. That is Meaningful Changes to the Scrum Guide. This is number 33 of our Agile shorts. And this is going to be a really cool one for us because we went through and kind of looked back at the some of the changes that have happened with the Scrum Guide. And we wanted to pick out some of the things that really we thought were meaningful to us. And we thought were meaningful to, we're going to be very meaningful to the folks that are going to be, using and leveraging Scrum moving forward. There's certainly things that we think that we talk a lot about with the clients that we service, both in terms of training and consulting and coaching. So with me is Kumar Datatran and Chris Daly, our partners here at Agile Meridian. I'm Mike Jebber, and I will be helping to facilitate the three crazy people from our company talking about this great topic. But we want to get into four main areas that we thought, when we were looking at it, we thought were really, really meaningful in terms of moving forward, based on what we've experienced in the past. I don't know about you two, but I've been doing this since the mid 2000s, right? So over 15 years, and right off the get go, you could see how things have changed and how people have used Scrum and how Scrum has changed over the years. But I think that when you look at these things that we're going to talk about next, these were things I felt really strongly about that were big improvements in terms of where they were going and how they were leveraging the framework moving forward. And the first one we wanted to talk about really was about one team. And I wanted to kind of hand this over to Kumar and ask you, what is it that when you think about one team and this improvement of what we saw in the Scrum Guide, what do you pull out of what they're doing and where they're going with this one team concept?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's really about one team focused on one product, right? And the idea that the Scrum Master, the product owner, and the team, the development team, used to be sort of separated. The development team was separate in the older version of the Scrum Guide. Now it's all together. It's just the Scrum team, and the Scrum team includes all of the important people that are needed to deliver on that product, on the vision of the product. So it resonates with me particularly because I remember, like you, Mike, my experience with Scrum and XP started in the early to mid 2000s, like 2003 or so. That was always like, product owners are like, am I part of the team? Do I need to go to all these ceremonies? I don't need to because I'm not really part of the team, right? So I think this clears it up and it resonates with me because I've always thought of it as being one team.
Absolutely.
How about you, Chris?
Yeah, it clears it up and it makes it easier to understand, right? I mean, that one of the big things that when you're training people on Scrum is, well, what part of, to your point, Kumar, what part of the team am I, right? And when you start referencing it and you start talking about the daily Scrum, for example, is for the team, well, which team is it? Is it a Scrum team or is it the development team? And
yeah,
it's always been confusing. I think teams have gotten around that. I think they realize, product owner is there as part of the daily Scrum and is helping and understands their role. And most teams it doesn't really become an issue except when you're trying to teach it and first learn it.
Yeah.
I'm glad they clarified it. It makes it a lot better. One of the things that I know is that, or one of the things I've experienced is that in my pursuit to become a professional Scrum trainer, and through that process, I acquired a PSM3. One of the things that that Scrum.org folks kept saying was that it's important what you say and that words matter. And I think this helps make it simpler for people to understand, right? It's one thing that now we're just talking, if we say team or Scrum team, we're talking about the same group of people. So it eliminates a lot of confusion. So
yeah, I definitely think it's a great thing, and it feels like the Scrum Guide's almost caught up to what some of the really effective practitioners have been doing now for several years. So it's great to see it in black and white, right? It's great to see it called out as explicit, and that actually leads us into our second topic, which is about being more explicit commitments in three different areas, in looking at being more deliberate in terms of what happens. And this kind of goes into what we're going to talk about on the fourth item we're going to cover. But I wanted to talk about, let you two talk a little bit about these explicit call outs now for what we're seeing in terms of looking at the product backlog, looking at the sprint backlog, and looking at increments, and being much more explicit with that, and how we think it's a really good thing to have, because it's how it really helps people out.
Yeah, I think it's a good improvement as well, and it's particularly resonates with me because the three artifacts, the product backlog, as you mentioned, the sprint backlog, and the increment, each of them now contain a commitment that's associated with it. So for the product backlog, it's the product goal. What's the goal for that product, right? What's the vision, the reason that we're developing this thing in the first place? For the sprint backlog, it's always been, and it still is, the sprint goal. What are you going to develop or deliver at the end of the sprint? And then finally, for the increment, it's the definition of done. So that's the commitment that the team makes, that in that increment, they're going to follow that definition of done, that they create themselves, and may modify sprint over sprint because it's not complete enough, or it's too restrictive, or whatever it might be. But each of those artifacts now has a very explicit commitment, and that helps the team really sort of manage how they work together and how they deliver on their commitments.
I'm going to have some fun with this one, because when I learned Scrum years and years ago, it was the team was expected to commit that they were going to, whatever they had identified in the sprint backlog, right, coming out of sprint planning, they were going to commit that they were going to do their best to get that done. And somewhere in the 2014, 2016 range, they kind of softened it. They said, well, we're not going to call it a commitment. We're going to call it a forecast, right? Yeah, exactly. It's a forecast. And it's like, and the reason they explained that they did that was because that when in the earlier versions of Scrum, people would say commitment, and then senior leadership would expect the team to kill itself trying to make that commitment, right? And we're, we overcommitted, so we got to, kill ourselves, which is the opposite of what we want with Scrum. And so they moved away to forecast, and now we're kind of coming back to commitment again. And it's interesting. I'm going to be interested to see, whether that sticks for the next version, or, whether they adapt it even further. I don't know if you notice that, Kumar.
Yeah, it is interesting how the pendulum swings, right? I remember back in the mid to late 2000s, it was the single ringable neck, right? The and the pigs and the chickens as a metaphors for who's committed and who's just an observer, or who's just a spectator. And those things were kind of dropped because, well, who wants to be a pig really in that scenario, right? Everyone wants to be a chicken. So I'm interested also to see how that plays out, and I think that the four sort of main things that resonate with us feel like they kind of stick together in a way, and the commitments lead to more self-managing behavior, which we're going to get to in a minute, at least for me.
Yeah, and I think with the advent of business agility and folks working farther up the value stream to educate senior leaders and folks that come pre-delivery team, which again, originally the team was the delivery team. It was the developers. It wasn't this expanded group of people. Now that more people are getting educated on this, it feels like we can safely go back to being more explicit around these things, because there's a better understanding of what those explicit things mean. Versus early on, we were training one half or a small portion of the organization, and everybody else was using those words. To your point, Chris, words mean something. They were using it for the old terminology. They were using it for the old meanings, not what they meant in a new environment. So I think that's a really, really key point. And it is going to be interesting to see how explicit commitments is really going to kind of bring the tightness back to this, and the flow and the effectiveness of iterative delivery. So, and that kind of brings us thinking about, educating others and educating up the stream, but also growing and evolving in this. There's also a great thing mentioned in this around leadership and around how leadership itself is kind of looked at a little bit differently. They used to talk about servant leaders. And now when you read and you look into the new Scrum Guide, it's more around leaders that serve, which I think is really a better description of what the intent of servant leadership was when it was brought up. I'm interested, Chris, what you think, what this is going to do for people when it's described and talked about in this manner versus the way it was talked about before.
I think it's gonna help, right? Because one of the things that, when you say servant leadership, that tends to imply an approach, right, of how you're going to do things. And as leaders, I think we use different types of leadership at different points in time. And I think by saying leaders that serve, you can be a leader and choose which leadership styles you're using, but yet when it comes to that team, how are you going to help them go forward? And I think that's an interesting change in the way they've decided to approach that. I don't know if you guys all think I'm, gone off the deep end on that, or whether you agree or not. But
I think you've gone off the deep end on a lot of things, but on this,
not on this
topic,
it's true.
I think you're right on. You're spot on. And I think the authors of the Scrum Guide saw that servant leadership, specifically with the role of the Scrum Master, led to certain types of behaviors or leadership styles there, that where the Scrum Masters weren't really leading first, they were serving first, and the leadership wasn't being developed, right? Mm-hmm. They were serving. They were the admin or the secretary for the team. They got the donuts and the coffee and so on and so forth. Right. They didn't do a whole lot of leading and coaching and guiding and training and all the other things, the stances that a Scrum Master should adopt to help their team be more self-managing and more, sort of own their commitments and things like that. And so I think this is a deliberate attempt. You said it before, language is really important, right? So leaders that serve has a different connotation. Leaders first, serve, when needed and when appropriate is the way I look at it.
Those are both very, very accurate ways to look at it in terms of how it will impact, different environments and different team structures and stuff. And complementary to that, we move to our fourth item, is really around the team itself and the fact that we're talking about self-managing teams, not just self-organizing, like we had said in the early days, which is part of becoming self-managing, right? But self-managing being that kind of the complementary side of the coin to leaders that serve, and actually having those two things work very tightly in concert. And I'm interested to hear again what you two think on how this is going to impact teams and how they operate with their Scrum Masters, with their product owners, within each other, and across the value stream with their products and services.
Yeah, for me, I think self-managing is a stronger set of words than self-organizing. And I feel that, when you tell people, oh, you're self-organizing, just go figure out what you need to do. I think for people new to Agile and Scrum, or people, who are maybe not used to thinking about what they should be working on and are more used to waiting for people to tell them what to do, that's a hard concept to grasp. What you want me to figure out what I'm supposed to do?
Especially if they've never done it before, right?
Exactly. It's like
completely new.
Yeah, I don't know. Tell me what I need to work on next. No, I can't tell you. You have to figure it out on your own, right? And I think self-managing may also be difficult especially for new people. But I think combined with these other things that we talked about, the one team, the explicit commitments, the leaders that serve, I think that in combination will help people understand that they're sort of responsible for managing their own commitments, their own work, and it will lead to more self-organizing behavior. At least that's my theory, my thought.
Yeah, I would agree. The term organizing, when I've had leaders that have been in my training courses, or you're talking to leaders and you talk about self-organizing, you're like, wait a minute, they don't get to decide who's going to be on what team. That's in my realm, right? That's my job. And I think that causes us to have to go back and re-explain things and kind of sets us off on a different course. Self-managing opens that up and says, you can organize the team, right? In terms of how you traditionally think about it. But we're going to let the team be inside its box. We're going to let the team do what it needs to do, right?
Yeah.
It's going to figure it out on its own. So, yeah, I agree 100% with what you said, Kumar.
It's interesting in a way that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Kumar.
I was just going to say, wow, agreement.
I knew as soon as I said that it was going to come back at me. So
absolutely, it's interesting too when you take these four things, and actually it was kind of occurring to me as we were talking about it on this Agile short. They all kind of drive towards a better way for folks to interpret what it is that they're going to be doing, how they're going to be interacting, and to your point, Chris, something you said a little earlier, the adoption of this should be a little simpler because those lines were so blurry and with the old way that they were described in all four of these areas. They weren't as explicit, not just in terms of the commitments that we talked about in the second part, but also in terms of what is a team, what is organized to what level, how much organizational, freedom do they get? Yeah. And all of these different things, I think, will help to kind of box it or dial it in for a starter to be able to implement and have success sooner is what I'm hoping to see out of this for the folks that are new. And it also kind of answers maybe some of the differences or the ambiguity for folks that are already doing it to say, all right, well, now I know how to kind of wrangle this in and they can tighten it up a bit and get a little more effectiveness out of it. So yeah. Any last comments that we have on these four areas or the Scrum Guide enhancements in general?
I'd be real surprised. I am real surprised because a lot of people they get their Scrum certification and they say they believe they know Scrum and they go off and they're done. Right. And these changes in the Scrum Guide are important ones that need to be carried out, that people need to understand. And it's really, I think, are you guys getting feedback from me?
Just a little. You're good, I think.
Okay. So I think the Scrum Guide really, I think people need to go back and need to stay up to date on it, right? And remember that it really defines what we're trying to do here in terms of Scrum. And, it's the thing we point to when somebody says, hey, that's not Scrum, you can go check it out in the Scrum Guide, right? And it's not there, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's pretty important. And I'm going to make one more little quip here, one ask. I really would like for scrum.org or, Ken and Jeff, if you will, to consider taking what I consider the last remnant of the terminology, the developers, and replace that with something else. Because when you sit down and talk to, and I've got some teams where I'm coaching right now where they're essentially configuration teams in Salesforce, right? And we're teaching them Scrum and we go through the whole process. I train them and they go, well, this doesn't apply to us. We're not developers, and really Scrum and the Scrum Guide's really doing that. It's starting to move toward more so it can be applied to a broader audience. And I really wish we'd come up with a new term for that.
Yeah, I think the planets must be in alignment since we are so agreeable today, Chris. I totally agree. And I think the intent with the Scrum Guide was to make it applicable to more than software.
Yeah.
And so developers is sort of this vestigial term that is still there, right? And I think Ken and I don't know them, but I think they would argue, well, you could be a developer and develop anything. You could be developing configuration scripts. or new training if you're a training organization, or legislation if you're in the government. You're just a developer developing those things. But I think that the industry understanding of what a developer is different than that, right? There's still sort of this connotation that developer is someone that develops code, very specific. And the other thing I'd say is, yes, I agree with everything else you said. And, what we covered is just a small portion of the Scrum Guide. What we feel are the most important, at least to us, elements that went through some change, and encourage you to read it. It's not as long as it was before. It started out being 100 pages, and now it's only 13. So you have less to read. And so that would be my parting thought.
Absolutely. I agree with both of you. I think we need the Ted Lasso suggestion box out there for Ken and company to be able to take a few things in, but they're making great progress. I think these are all wins. They're all going to be very valuable and important. But thank you, everybody, for attending. We really enjoy having you here with us on our Agile Shorts cadence, and looking forward to seeing you again next time. Thank you. Thank you both.
Everybody.